the Europeans who benefited greatly from the Muslim knowledge. In fact, I think it's arguable that the hadith about one of the signs of the end of time is antarid al-amatu rabbataha. I mean, my personal interpretation of that, I haven't seen it from a scholar, but my personal interpretation of that is that the Islamic civilization gave birth to the Western civilization. And the Islamic civilization was a amma civilization. It was a civilization of servitude. But it gave birth to a civilization of hegemony, a civilization of rububiyyah that really took it upon itself to conquer nature, and instead of working with nature, to subdue nature. In fact, the metaphor that was used by Francis Bacon, who is really at the root of modern Western civilization. Francis Bacon is probably the single most important person in the change that occurs in Western civilization from a religious society to a secular society. I mean, he really begins that transformation. There are people before him, undeniably, but he's at the root of it when deductive reasoning was supplanted and replaced by inductive reasoning, and the scientific method becomes the only method of knowledge, which is only one aspect of knowledge. And so the Muslims had metaphysics, but they also had physics, and you need both to have a healthy civilization. So it's important. And the nice thing about this country is there is a lot of intellectual activity. And I spent last year, we had an evening one night with several of the Turkish scholars, and I was just really impressed to see them discussing a lot of the ideas in Western philosophy. They were, they'd read Heidegger, Habermas, they knew what postmodernism was, they knew what critical theory was, and I haven't seen that in scholars in other parts of the Muslim world. And those are important for scholars to be aware of, because these are the things that people don't realize that philosophy is at the root of what determines the worldview of civilizations. And so to ignore philosophy is really to ignore the worldview that is dominant in your civilization. And we have a hegemonic civilization that is having very, very negative effects on the environment. It's a belligerent civilization. It's a civilization that manufactures massive amounts of weapons and then spreads those weapons all over the world, and then really partakes in conflicts that happen as a result of those weapons. And so the Muslim civilization was traditionally a service-oriented civilization. It was a civilization that every enterprise involved serving the poor, free hospitals. The Muslims started a lot of the things that we take for granted in some of the more enlightened societies. And I'm talking more, not so much enlightened in terms of religious, but just in terms of social services, like the Northern European countries, like Norway and Iceland and Denmark. Iceland, I think, is probably one of the most intelligent secular societies out there. And they've done amazing things in their social welfare, prohibiting pornography, not on religious grounds, but simply on the common weal. It wasn't a healthy thing for a society. They're also one of the few societies that is truly middle class. And the Prophet ﷺ, even though he chose poverty over wealth, and he had the choice, he did that as a way of solidarity with poor people, which are the majority of people on the planet. But he preferred middle. He preferred the middle, what we would call the middle class. And I'm not talking about middle class in America, which is an extravagant, wealthy class, but middle class in cultures where people have enough. They have their basic needs are met. That's a middle class, when your basic needs are met. I mean, middle class in the West is actually, would be considered a very wealthy class historically. I mean, the houses that a lot of us live in the West, if you go and visit King Abdul Aziz's house the 100 years ago, if you visit his palace in Ta'if, which we did a few years back, it's actually far less impressive than most of the middle class houses I've been in the United States. And that was a king of the Arabian Peninsula. So people today live like kings of the past. So we're here in Turkey, and this is a really difficult time for Muslims, as all of you are very aware. I don't think anybody here is unaware of a lot of the events that have been happening in the Muslim world. There's an incredible amount of suffering going on right down the road. And there's a helplessness, I think, that we all feel. Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman radiallahu anhu once said that towards the latter days, the Prophet told him that towards the latter days, he said, يُخَيَّرُ الْمَرْءُ بَيْنَ الْعَجْزِ وَالْفُجُورِ, that people would be given a choice of being bad people or being helpless people. And one of the tabi'een said, قَبَّحَ اللَّهُ الْعَجْزِ, may Allah make ugly the helplessness, because these were Arab people, strong people. And Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman said, قَبَّحَكَ اللَّهُ أَنْتَ, may Allah make you ugly. Al-ajzu khayrun min al-fujur. Helplessness is better than profligacy. So the sunnah of helplessness, and our Prophet was helpless in Mecca. He was helpless at Ta'if. There's a sunnah of being helpless. And part of that sunnah is accepting your state. That is your state. It's helplessness. And it's a hard state to accept. But that is the sunnah of helplessness. It's to accept your state and to call on God and to be content with the qadr. Because there's only two views on this planet. One is that we live in an orderly universe. And this doesn't just mean the heavenly orders or the orders of the seasons. The flowers bloom in an orderly manner. Farmers don't plant in winter. Farmers know when to plant because there's an order. If you plant outside of the season of planting, you're not going to harvest the fruit. They know that. And so the nature of God's world is order. And then there's the people that don't believe that this is a chaotic, disorderly planet with no order in it. The chaos and disorder that you see on the planet only comes from the chaos and disorder that's within us, that when we don't align ourselves with heavenly order. That's all it is. It's a manifestation of our own disorder. And that is because of sinfulness. It's as simple as that. If people align themselves with God, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala harmonizes their conditions. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah doesn't change the conditions of a people. مَا بِقَوْمٍ. He doesn't change the conditions of a people until they change what's in themselves. So this is takween and taklif. Amr takwini and amr taklifi. The conditions they're mukawwana, they're outside of the taklif. You can't determine your conditions. You can't determine your conditions. The people in Gaza did not determine their conditions. They were born into those conditions. We didn't determine our conditions. But what we can determine is what's in our nafs. That's where Allah has given us power. We can actually change what's in ourselves. And God says that when you get enough people to do that, He will change your conditions. That's His business. That's not our business. And part of the qalb al-haqa'iq, which is the inversion of realities that happens at the end of time, is that people are preoccupied with things outside of their power and completely unoccupied, completely negligent of things within their power. And so this is a huge problem with the human condition. So the time we're here is a short time. The Quran about ayyam ma'dudat, about Ramadan, it says that their ma'dudat is what they call jam'u qillah. You know, ayyam is jam'u qillah, that it's awqats, it's jam'u qillah. It's a plural of paucity. It's a few days. And so we're here for a limited amount of time, and we want to make the best of the time that we can and utilize the time, try not to waste our time. We're inefficient by our nature. And Allah's kataba alayna hada shay. I mean, this is something, even our bodies are working at about a 33-34% efficiency rate in terms of the usage of our caloric energy. Allah, that's His sunnah in creation. You know, a car has about a 7 to 10% efficiency rate. 90% of the car's energy is dissipated, it's just wasted. So humans are master time wasters. We're master food wasters. If you see the tonnage of food that's wasted on this planet, it's beyond belief. There was a lot of food wasted tonight. We waste food, we waste money, we waste time. But what we should do is make tawbah and get better and better, inshallah, at trying to utilize the time. Because as it's a diminishing commodity, if you want to use an economic metaphor, wal asri inna al-insana lafi khusr. By time, man is at loss because it's just dissipating. Life is a concatenant of moments. It's just one moment after the other. Allah, they called Allah, the scholastics in medieval Christianity called God the Nunc Stans. And I think they probably got that from Imam al-Jurjani. In the Ta'rifat, he says that God is al-an ad-da'im, the eternal now. God is in the present tense. And we are always in the present tense, but we're obsessed with the past and the future. We're in a state of khawf, about the future, fear. Everybody's in fear and trepidation. What's going to happen next? And then we have grief over the past. This is the human condition. The Prophet ﷺ sought refuge from these states. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-huzni, right? Min al-huzn, min al-hammi wal hazan. I seek refuge in you from anxiety about the future and hazan about the past. So he sought refuge in that state, from that state. So we have a short time, try to make the best of the time.